The season's last rescue auction was drawing to a close. Deep within the Colorado foothills, a few remaining participants lingered in a modest livestock barn, their boots rustling the straw-strewn floor. The majority of the dogs had found new homes, departing with wagging tails after papers were signed. What was left was a profound quiet, and a single cage relegated to the barn's furthest corner. Inside, Bruno stood. He was a German shepherd, though he was hardly recognizable as such. His ribs protruded through a thin, patchy coat. One of his ears drooped limply. A prominent scar traced a line across his flank. Yet his posture, stiff and watchful, radiated an energy that cautioned everyone to maintain a safe distance. He made no sound, neither barking nor cowering. He simply observed. "Our next and final animal," the auctioneer announced, glancing at his clipboard. "Male German shepherd, discovered tied up behind a deserted mill. Critically underweight and reactive, particularly towards men. We'll start the bidding at $1. Bruno's ears twitched upon hearing the word men, just as a tall male volunteer approached within several feet of his cage. Bruno lunged with force. A sharp snarl split the air as the cage bars shuddered from the blow. A wave of gasps went through the barn. "That one nearly took a chunk out of someone." A person whispered, "He's a liability." The auctioneer cleared his throat, pausing. Not a single hand went up, until a voice bid, $1. Head swiveled. A small, still girl, around 11 years of age, stood near the ring's perimeter. Beside her was a woman, her mother, who placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Are you certain, young lady?" the auctioneer inquired, one eyebrow raised. The girl met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I want him." A few people chuckled. One person scoffed, "She'll come to regret that." The auctioneer, however, simply shrugged. "Sold for $1. And so, the final sale was made not to an individual looking for a flawless dog, but to a girl who recognized something broken and was convinced it was still worth saving. Ellie Carter was naturally reserved. By age 11, she was no stranger to loss, having lost her father when she was just 7. And while it was never explicitly stated, Ellie hadn't quite spoken in the same manner since. She was a better listener than a talker. She picked up on details others missed, such as silence and sadness. Observing Bruno, she perceived not a threat, but agony. He wasn't baring his teeth to intimidate. He was constructing a barrier, much as she had done herself. Her mother, Samantha, stood with her, a look of concern on her face. As a part-time behaviorist, Samantha was familiar with troubled animals, but Bruno was exceptional. He was tightly wound, perpetually on edge, and unpredictable. Samantha glanced at her daughter. "Ellie, you understand this is not going to be simple." Ellie's gaze remained steady. "I know," she replied softly. "And I also know that he's hurting and needs love, just as I did." Her words hung between them with a sacred quality. For an instant, everything else disappeared. The murmurs, the cautionary words, the burden of the paperwork. Still within his crate, Bruno raised his head. His gaze connected with Ellie's. The stare was brief, lasting only a second or two, yet in that moment, something changed in the atmosphere between them. He did not detect fear in her. He saw compassion. He saw another soul that had been wounded. He saw a quality he hadn't encountered in a very long time, someone unafraid to truly see him. And deep inside that scarred, tense body, a part of him responded. It wasn't trust, not yet, but a relaxing, a deep breath, a minuscule flicker of acquiescence. Ellie extended her hand slowly toward the crate's bars. Samantha drew a sharp breath, moving forward on instinct before stopping herself. Because Bruno also moved, not quickly or aggressively, but forward. He gently nudged his head against Ellie's small hand. In the quiet stillness of the barn, onlookers observed with wide, astonished eyes, completely silent. "He's not mean," Ellie whispered. "He's just sad." The paperwork was completed swiftly. Yet nobody was eager to depart. Spectators lingered near the barn's exit, casting furtive looks at the girl and the dog who had just changed the outcome of an auction that no one thought would be significant. As Bruno's crate was wheeled out toward the parking lot, he did not growl again. He didn't bark or lunge. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on Ellie. Samantha maintained a cautious pace, her gaze shifting between her daughter and the animal that was now theirs. She had dedicated years to the study of behavior, body language, and microreactions, and she could see that Bruno's posture had altered. It was a subtle change, but enough for her to recognize its importance. He remained tense and guarded, but a definite shift had occurred. He is following her, she murmured to herself. Not the food, not the leash, but her. When they got to their SUV, Bruno paused. He sniffed at the open rear area, where they had taken off the crate door and furnished it with soft blankets. It was a space made not to confine him, but to welcome him. Yet, he remained stationary. Ellie did not coax him. She just knelt beside the vehicle, keeping low, with her hands in her lap. There were no words, no orders, only her presence. 10 minutes went by, and then 20. At last, Bruno took a step forward. His movements were stiff, a result of months of stress and neglect. Each step highlighted just how emaciated he was, how much of him had been eroded both physically and emotionally. His paws shook slightly as he climbed inside, not from fright, but from profound fatigue. His entry wasn't elegant. He lowered his head and moved with deliberate slowness. Each paw placement was a careful negotiation, but he went in. Ellie softly shut the hatch. She offered no smile or cheer, but simply laid her palm on the glass and whispered, "You are not alone anymore." In the distance, a volunteer who had previously warned them watched, shaking his head in amazement. That dog is already different. Samantha looked at her daughter, and then at the German shepherd curled up in the back. Maybe, she said quietly, because someone finally believed that he could be. The drive home was silent. There was no music or conversation, just the sound of the tires on the snow and the steady breathing of a dog behind them. It felt, however, like the start of something new. Their home was situated on a quiet road, a small farmhouse nestled between wide-open fields and a row of pine trees, a peaceful, still setting. It was the sort of place designed for healing, though Bruno was not yet aware of this. The initial days were delicate. He would not eat if someone was present in the room. He didn't truly sleep. He would lie down, but one eye always remained partially open, his ears reacting to every floorboard creak or shifting shadow. Even soft sounds, like running water or a squeaking door hinge, caused him to flinch. He rarely left the corner they prepared for him, a doorless crate filled with soft blankets near the fireplace. It was a safe spot, but not yet one he trusted. Samantha attempted to keep her distance, but Bruno would growl quietly whenever she passed through the room. It was not anger, but a reaction rooted in memory, of hands that were too forceful, of voices that were too loud. Dark-colored clothing appeared to aggravate his anxiety. Ellie observed this and started to move quietly in the mornings, gently setting Bruno's food near his crate before retreating. Next to his bowl each time, she placed a small note with drawings of trees, suns, and hearts. "So he knows he's not alone," she explained to her mother. She did not try to touch him or call his name. She would simply sit cross-legged on the far side of the room, drawing in her sketchbook and humming softly. Bruno never looked at her directly, but he did not turn away. In a house filled with such quiet, this was significant. Every evening, Samantha would observe them from the kitchen doorway. No words were exchanged between the girl and the dog, only the passing of time and a shared stillness. And gradually, very gradually, Bruno started to eat while they were still in the room. They weren't close, but they were near enough. As the second week concluded, Bruno started to cast off the burden of his fear. His growling subsided, and the tightness in his shoulders began to ease. His eyes still surveyed every room before he entered, but they no longer had the wild, trapped look of an animal expecting to be harmed. He was beginning to live, not merely to survive. He would now take his meals with them in the vicinity. He even rested within a few feet of Ellie as she sketched, his ears twitching at the sound of her pencil on the paper, but he never moved away. Trust was beginning to grow in the quiet. Then, one evening, an event both subtle and remarkable occurred. The fire crackled gently in the living room. Samantha was reading a book in the warm lamplight. Upstairs, Ellie had just gone to bed. Bruno got up from his blanket. He did not pace as he used to. He walked deliberately to the back of the house, paused at the door, and then circled once, seeming unsure. Samantha stayed still. A soft sound came from the stairs as Ellie came down. She didn't say a word. She just went to the back door, opened it softly, and sat down beside it, hugging her knees. Bruno looked at her. Their eyes connected for a moment. An understanding, too quiet for words, passed between them. Then, For the very first time, Bruno stepped out into the night, not impelled by panic, but enticed by a sense of peace. The air outside was frigid, and a star-dusted sky hung silently above him. Bruno walked onto the grass and stopped, his breath visible in the cold. In that quiet, a deeply buried sensation stirred within him, a faint resonance of belonging, a dimly recalled feeling of past safety, of having once been loved. For a brief time, the night enveloped him like a memory. Then another feeling arose, subtle yet distinct. It was that same feeling, but no longer from his past. It was alive in the present. This time, its source was not a distant memory, but the girl and the woman behind him, who had waited without pressure, without apprehension. It was the feeling of love once more. This time, however, it was constant, warm, and genuine. Moonlight streamed across the yard as he explored, his nose to the wind. Ellie remained seated, motionless. A few minutes later, Bruno came back to the doorway. He no longer seemed uncertain. He didn't pause. He walked back inside. Ellie gave a faint smile. "He's learning that needing someone isn't a weakness," she whispered. And in that moment, beneath a quiet roof, trust did not arrive with a thunderclap. It arrived with a single step. It took place on a windswept Saturday. The house groaned as strong gusts pressed against the windows. Ellie was on the living room floor, coloring a drawing of Bruno under a snow-covered tree. Samantha was humming quietly in the kitchen, where the aroma of roasted carrots and rosemary filled the house. Bruno was lying near the front door, not asleep, but resting. Then came the sound of crunching gravel. A delivery vehicle turned into the long gravel driveway, its tires crackling like brittle leaves. Bruno's ears pricked up. Ellie stopped coloring. 3 loud knocks on the door echoed like a gunshot in Bruno's memory. He was up on his feet in an instant, his body rigid, teeth exposed, and the fur on his back raised. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. The doorknob began to turn. The man on the porch moved to enter, and Bruno's control snapped. The former terror, the agony, the raw survival instinct, it all came rushing back. He threw himself at the door with immense force, snarling and barking, poised to attack the silhouette on the other side. The delivery man staggered backward, his eyes wide with fear. Across the room, Ellie was frozen. At that moment, something within her shattered. She felt as if the trust she had worked so diligently to build was disintegrating before her. The love she had given Bruno, the hope she had held on to, all seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Her throat constricted. "Bruno," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Please don't. Please." He froze. His body was trembling. The growl subsided but remained a low rumble in his throat. He swiveled around slowly. Ellie was standing several feet away. Her hands lifted slightly, not in a command, but as a supplication. Her eyes, full of sadness rather than fear, met his. A quiet disappointment was there too, and something more, hurt. Bruno's breathing faltered. He backed away from the door. Then he turned to face Ellie completely and walked toward her, slowly and uncertainly. His head was down, and his tail, no longer erect, swayed gently. He came to a stop at her feet, nudged his nose into her hand, and then laid his head on her knee. Ellie remained silent and still. She simply allowed him to be there. And in that quiet, Bruno discovered something more powerful than fear: forgiveness. Snow had descended during the night like a soft lullaby, unhurried, gentle, and thorough. By morning, the world around the farmhouse was hushed and white. The trees were bowed respectfully under the load. The fence posts were adorned with soft, frosty caps. The air had the distinct stillness that only winter can bring. Ellie had developed a cold the previous day and was at home, wrapped in quilts with flushed cheeks, her sketchbook on her lap. Samantha kissed her forehead and murmured, "We will not be gone long." It was just Samantha and Bruno that morning, the two of them alone in the quiet of a slumbering forest. They moved slowly along the trail. Bruno's paws made soft crunching sounds in the snow, his breath appearing in small clouds. For a time, everything was peaceful and calm. Samantha even smiled as she unhooked his leash, allowing him a moment of freedom. Then he froze. Bruno's frame went rigid as a statue. He raised his head, his ears erect, as his nose sharply sampled the wind. Something was amiss. An instant later, he vanished, darting into the woods as silently as a ghost. "Bruno!" Samantha cried out after him. her heart pounding in her chest. She began to run. Branches lashed at her face. Her boots skidded on roots concealed by the snow. And then she heard it. A bark, forceful, insistent, and repetitive. Her chest grew tight. The sound was primitive, untamed. For one dreadful second, she was transported back to the shelter, to the snarls and cages, to all the warning signs. She broke through into a clearing and stopped short. Bruno was there, positioned before a figure in the snow, not attacking, but raising an alarm. A young man was collapsed in a snowdrift, his lips blue, one leg twisted at a terrible angle. He was hardly breathing. And Bruno was standing over him, barking, alerting, summoning help. Tears streamed down Samantha's face as she knelt by the man's side, her fingers already dialing for help. Even as the rescue team, all strangers, came, Bruno did not flee. He did not become aggressive. He stayed right beside her. That evening, while Samantha recounted the story beside the fire, Ellie listened without a word. She then glanced down at her most recent drawing, Bruno under a snowy pine, standing watch. He didn't simply change, she whispered after a pause. He made a choice. Months had passed since Bruno's arrival, since the days of growling, flinching, and silence, since that chilly afternoon when he first placed his head in Ellie's lap. Now, the barn doors were open once more, not for an auction, but for a more subdued event, a gathering. Ellie had been asked to come back to the very place where she had first laid eyes on him, where she had lifted her hand for a dog that nobody else wanted, for the price of just $1. The organizers were hosting a community forum on animal welfare and had inquired if the young girl with the quiet voice would be open to sharing what happened next. And so, she found herself standing just inside that same rustic barn. Samantha was off to one side, observing as Ellie held Bruno's leash in one hand and a collection of her drawings in the other. Bruno walked calmly at her side. There was no pulling, no resistance, only a sense of peace. Onlookers whispered as they noticed him. "That is him," one person muttered. "The shepherd from that auction." Ellie proceeded to the front of the barn. Bruno sat down by her feet. She looked over the crowd, adults, children, families, and then down at her sketchbook. "I wasn't sure how to fix him," she stated softly. "I only knew that he was sad, and so was I." Her voice remained steady. "They said he was dangerous, but I saw someone who was afraid. My goal wasn't to change him. I just wanted him to feel secure enough to be himself." She displayed a drawing of Bruno curled up under a tree, his eyes wide and full of anxiety. "I made this during the first few days," she explained, "when he trusted no one, when every little noise made him jump. But even at that time, I knew he was trying." Bruno stretched out on the wooden floor, his eyes half closed, his body at ease. Near the rear of the crowd, an elderly woman rose. She had been present at the initial auction, had seen Bruno snarl and shake, and had cautioned Ellie against the effort. Now, she came forward, her voice quiet and weathered. "I told her not to do it," the woman admitted. "I believe some dogs are just too far gone." She gazed at Ellie, then at Bruno. But she made no attempt to fix him. She offered him space and time. The woman paused, and somehow, he recovered on his own terms. Bruno shifted slightly, moving nearer to Ellie's leg, but the barn remained silent. Ellie said nothing more. She simply smiled, a small, unwavering smile, and allowed her hand to rest softly on his back. And Bruno remained there, not out of obedience, but because, for the first time in his life, he felt no compulsion to leave.